There are places in the deep forests of the United States where the world behaves in quiet, unnatural ways. Sound fades without warning. Trails shift length. Footprints stop in the middle of soft ground. People vanish without struggle, and others return changed, speaking in calm, flat voices about shapes that watch them from impossible angles. Rangers rarely record these events in official reports, but scattered notes, private logs, and old field journals form a different story, one that stretches across decades and state lines. These reports describe tall figures standing at tree lines, strange impressions appearing without approach, and silence that falls so suddenly it feels alive. When you line up the cases from Oregon, Colorado, Tennessee, Maine, and the Appalachians, the patterns grow unmistakable. Something moves in the deep woods, something patient, something that does not want to be found, and these chapters explore the evidence it leaves behind in the quiet. The woods that don't return sound. The first signs appeared so quietly that most people did not notice. A missing camper here, a hiker who never reached the trailhead, a pair of brothers who stepped off a marked path and were not seen again. These reports came from different states, but each one came from a region, the US. Forest Service classifies as deep wood zones, areas where dense tree lines break radio signals and sunlight reaches the ground at strange angles. When investigators looked at the earliest records, some dated back to 1979, filed by a ranger named Harold Merrin from the Kaibab National Forest in Arizona. He wrote a line that later stood out. Sound did not travel the same way inside the ridge. Shouting returned only half of the echo. His note was added as an observation, not a warning. At the time, no one thought it mattered. The pattern surfaced again in 1987 when two survey workers, Daniel Pierce and Wesley Cole, vanished in the Bitterroot Range in Montana. Their last known location was marked on a map with a small circle and a note in pencil. Odd silence on approach. Trees pressed in. The supervisor, Hugh Danner, turned the map in with a brief comment. They heard something that wasn't wind. No other details were included. Their tools were found in a neat pile, untouched by weather, as if they had been placed there moments before someone left. There were no footprints leading away. Local deputies said the soil should have held impressions, even in dry weather. It did not. In 1994, a man named Robert Lister reported an encounter in the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. He claimed that while walking near Wolf Run Creek, he felt pressure on the air around him, as if something large had moved past without touching the ground. Lister wrote in his statement, "I could not hear my own breathing, but I could hear something else. It was slow, like weight shifting. I saw branches sway, but nothing walked through them." Rangers dismissed his report as stress and light distortion. Lister refused to return to that part of the forest. His wife later told investigators that he slept with the window locked, even in the hottest months. The most detailed description came from a wildlife officer named Elaine Proctor in 2002 during a search for a missing hunter near the Ouachita Mountains in Arkansas. She walked a slope just after dusk and noticed that every bird call stopped at the same time. According to her log, the stillness made it hard to judge distance. When she moved her flashlight across a stand of pines, she saw the shadow of something tall shift behind a trunk. She couldn't make out a face or a clear outline. She wrote, "It stood where it should not have been able to stand." Minutes later, she heard a tapping sound that echoed across the ridge but did not bounce back from any direction. Proctor said it felt as though the forest absorbed the echoes instead of returning them. In 2010, a rescue volunteer named Marcus Delaney searched the Red River Gorge in Kentucky for a missing college student. Delaney was known for his calm manner and rarely expressed fear, but in his recorded statement, he mentioned a strange detail. While moving along a narrow path at sunrise, he smelled something like warm metal, similar to the scent inside an old workshop. He also saw marks on a tree, thin, straight, almost parallel. A biologist later said no known animal made lines like those. Delaney compared the marks to scratches made by tools, not claws. "It watched me," he said in the recording. "I could not see it, but it was there." Search teams never found the student. There was also a strange case from 2013 involving two experienced hikers, Maria and Owen Caldwell, who entered the dense section of the Chattahoochee National Forest in Georgia. They reported hearing someone speaking in a low voice far off the path. The voice repeated the same 5 words, but they could not understand the language. When they called back, the voice stopped. They said the forest went unnaturally quiet. Later, Owen recalled that he felt a vibration in the ground, though no heavy steps followed. They left the forest early and filed a report titled Unknown Vocalization. Rangers told them it was likely an echo or an animal call distorted by the valley. Maria disagreed. She said the voice sounded like it was learning how to speak, not calling out. A ranger from Olympic National Park in Washington, known only in archives as Ranger L, wrote a detailed incident report in 2017. She described a large shape moving uphill without bending the ferns under it. She watched it for almost 8 seconds before it vanished behind a line of cedar trees. She estimated it to be at least 7 feet tall, but she could not explain why she heard nothing. No snapping branches, no heavy breathing, not even wind moving through hair or fur. Her final note read, "Something is living in these woods, and it understands the land better than we do." In 2019, a maintenance worker from the Superior National Forest in Minnesota captured audio on his work recorder. The sound lasted only 7 seconds. It began with a low hum and shifted into a sharp, short click. An acoustics specialist from Duluth examined the file and said the frequencies did not match any known animal in the region. The specialist suggested machinery interference, but the maintenance worker insisted he was 20 miles from any road, and the only equipment he carried was a handsaw. Many of these cases contain the same detail, hidden within the reports. People describe something moving without sound. Not moving quietly, but moving in a way that erased sound altogether. Trees that shook without cracking, footsteps that did not land, echoes that never returned. It created an uneasy pattern across state lines, stretching from Oregon to Maine. When journalists asked the Forest Service about these cases, they received short statements saying the woods can create illusions of silence, especially in dense canopy zones. Yet there is a lesser-known document recorded in 2021 by a retired ranger named Samuel Holt, who worked in the Adirondacks for 32 years. Holt described seeing a figure at dusk while closing a trail access point. The figure stood on a slope that should have made it lean forward, but it remained perfectly straight. Holt called out to it, and the figure shifted as if turning to look at him. He shined his flashlight, but the beam seemed to pass through a haze around its outline. Holt said it moved in a smooth way, like it was not bound by the angle of the ground. Holt turned in his keys the next morning and did not return to ranger work. One quiet question connects all of these records. If something can move through the deepest woods without touching the ground in a way humans can detect, then it may also be able to move toward people without warning. For decades, these reports stayed buried among lost hiker files and low-priority investigations. Only when patterns were compared did the shape of something unknown begin to form, like a shadow on the edge of a map, waiting for light to reveal it. The places where maps blur. There are areas in the deep woods where maps lose their shape. These are not places marked as dangerous or closed, and they do not draw attention on trail guides. They appear ordinary at first glance. Trees spaced evenly, soil packed with pine needles, clearings that look like any other clearing. Yet hikers return from these zones with stories that match in quiet, unsettling ways. They describe trails that do not stay the same length, landmarks that appear in different places, distances that stretch or shrink without warning. Rangers call these drift pockets, though no official map uses the term. One of the earliest documented cases came from 1,983 inches, the Willamette National Forest in Oregon. A biologist named Karen Doyle was conducting a simple wildlife survey and noted that her compass needle swung 5 degrees east whenever she stood near a basalt outcrop known as Harlow Point. When she stepped back 12 feet, the compass corrected itself. Doyle repeated the test 6 times with 2 different compasses. Each time, the needle shifted near the stone and returned to normal away from it. Doyle wrote, "The air around the outcrop felt dense, as if temperature changed, though the reading did not." She added no speculation. Her notes were filed and ignored. In 1991, a pair of hikers, Andrew and Lee Porter, walked into the deep section of the Greenbrier Valley in West Virginia. They followed a marked trail and reached a fork where a wooden sign pointed left toward a ridge overlook. They took the path, but after 40 minutes of walking, they ended at the exact fork they had started from. Their footprints were still fresh in the soil. Andrew said, "It felt like the trail folded." Lee said she never heard any birds during the entire stretch. They tried the path again and reached the overlook with no trouble. Rangers later inspected the area and found no loop, switchback, or connecting path that could explain the walk. A more complex case was reported in 2004 inches, Idaho's Salmon Chalice National Forest, by surveyor James Ward. Ward was tasked with marking the edges of a small research plot near a ridge south of Morse Creek. He recorded the perimeter using GPS and physical markers. When he returned the next morning, 2 of his markers were missing. and the remaining ones formed a shape different from the recorded perimeter. Ward measured again and came up with a slightly altered boundary, still rectangular, but shifted by several degrees. He had documented the original lines carefully, and his training did not allow careless errors. Ward eventually wrote, "The land felt rearranged. Not dramatically, just enough to lose direction." His supervisor dismissed the note as instrument error, though Ward insisted the shift was physical, not digital. During a 2011 search operation in the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina, rescue teams experienced confusion that appears repeatedly in logs. Crews reported that the same ravine appeared twice from opposite directions. One team wrote, "Ravine with moss-covered boulder repeated, same tree fall, same pattern of roots." They believed they had walked in a circle, but their GPS tracks showed a straight line. When supervisors reviewed the logs, they noticed a detail in the margin: sound changed pitch at midpoint. None of the teams could explain what that meant. They simply described the air becoming heavy, like stepping into a different room. Cases involving altered perception increased in the late 2010 seconds. In 2018, a trail runner named Miguel Reyes entered a wooded section of the Ouachita National Forest and reported that the forest felt stretched. Reyes said he recognized a large dead oak he had passed earlier, marked by a lightning strike, but when he reached it, the lightning scar was on the opposite side of the trunk. He took a photo on his phone. Later, at home, he checked the timestamp and confirmed he had photographed the same tree twice within 20 minutes, yet from angles that should have required him to be on opposite sides of a canyon. Reyes was known locally for his accuracy with trails and declined interviews afterward. In 2020, a group of forestry students from the University of Maine conducted a soil survey near the boundary of the Allagash Wilderness. One student, identified in records as KM, noted that her measurements showed an incline of 20 degrees, but visually, the land looked flat. When she poured water on the soil, it ran uphill for several inches before settling into a normal path. Her professor wrote it off as a trick of perspective and moisture density. KM wrote in her journal, "It felt like the forest wanted to change shape." Her note was never part of the official survey documents. It surfaced only when her classmates shared the journal entry years later. The most striking account comes from 2022, from a fire crew working the northern section of the Klamath National Forest during a summer burn. A firefighter named Jason Lee reported walking 50 yards ahead of his team to check a slope. When he radioed back, the crew heard his voice faint and distant, as if he were miles away, even though their line of sight showed him standing in place. When he returned, he asked why they had moved so far downhill. According to them, they had not moved at all. Jason later said the ridge expanded between them. His helmet camera showed normal terrain, but the audio recorded his breathing as if he were exerting himself on a steep climb. The video contradicted the physical environment. Across these reports, a quiet element repeats: distortions in distance, sound, and orientation. These distortions cluster in deep wood zones with heavy canopy coverage and uneven geology. In some cases, the shifts are small, compass needles tilting, trails looping, landmarks appearing offset by a few feet. In other cases, the changes grow more significant: ravines repeating, slopes altering, or sound traveling in unexpected ways. Rangers do not have an official explanation, but many acknowledge that these zones exist. Some refer to them as soft spots, where navigation becomes unreliable. A retired cartographer named Douglas Fern studied drift pockets for over a decade. In an interview recorded in 2019, he said, "These are places where the land holds its own shape, not the shape we draw." Fern collected dozens of field notes from rangers, hikers, and surveyors. In his private files, he highlighted a sentence from a 2007 ranger log in the Mark Twain National Forest. Trees moved to different distances without moving at all. Fern believed the phenomenon was environmental, but could not identify which environmental factor caused it. He suggested that sound disturbances, magnetic variation, light diffusion, and microclimate changes might combine in rare ways. Yet one detail in Fern's collection drew attention. Several of the drift pockets overlap with regions where people disappear under unusual circumstances. These zones often have limited radio contact, unclear trail boundaries, and heavy vegetation that makes tracking difficult. In these areas, the land seems to shift in ways that hide movement, both human and otherwise. Investigators who studied these overlapping zones noted that distortions might mask the presence of something moving inside the forest, something that uses the landscape's irregularities to remain hidden. The deep woods hold many places where direction becomes uncertain. but some rangers believe these regions act as boundaries, areas where something unknown moves more easily. When trails change length, when echoes fade, and when landmarks drift, the forest becomes a place where maps lose their meaning. In those moments, whatever lives within these woods may have the advantage, using the shifting land to watch, without being seen. The night walkers of the ridge. Night in the deep woods changes the world in quiet ways. Trails that look open during the day feel different under dim light. Tree lines that seem familiar begin to blur. Many disappearances recorded after sunset share repeating details, tall shapes between trunks, movements without sound, and reflections that do not match any known animal. Rangers rarely include these descriptions in official reports, yet they appear in personal logs, handwritten notes, and witness statements kept in local archives. One early account came from 1,986 inches, the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. A camper named Linda Rowe woke around 2:40 a.m. to the sound of her metal mug tapping against a rock. She thought wind had shifted her cooking gear, but when she stepped out of her tent, the air was still. Her lantern lit a narrow circle around her, and she noticed something at the edge of the light, two thin reflections spaced farther apart than any deer. They did not glow like typical animal eyes. Rowe described them as flat, like glass, picking up moonlight. When she raised the lantern, the reflections rose higher, as though the shape had stood up straight. No sound followed. She returned to her tent and waited for morning. Rangers later found her mug near a tree 20 feet away. In 1993, a group of 3 night hikers in the Ouachita Mountains reported seeing a figure walking along a ridgeline about 30 yards away. The hikers, experienced with low light navigation, noted the shape's height estimated between 7 and 8 feet. It moved slowly and evenly, without the bouncing motion typical of a person walking. They said it felt like watching a shadow detach from the ridge and glide across it. When they shined a flashlight towards the figure, the beam appeared to bend slightly, as if hitting haze. The shape turned and disappeared behind a cluster of pines. Search teams inspected the ridge the next day, but found no prints. Later cases strengthened the pattern. In 2005, a volunteer firefighter named Curtis Lane camped near Tennessee's Frozen Head State Park during a meteor shower. Around 1:15 a.m., he heard footsteps near his tent, slow, deliberate, spaced far apart. Lane, trained to stay calm in emergencies, unzipped the tent and scanned the area with his flashlight. He saw a tall figure standing behind a sycamore tree. Only part of the shape was visible: a shoulder, a section of its side, and a leg that appeared too long for the angle of the ground. Lane wrote, "It leaned the wrong way." Before he could react, the figure shifted behind the tree without sound. Lane gathered his gear and hiked back to the trailhead in the dark. He never returned to that park. A ranger in Wisconsin's Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest wrote an internal memo in 2011 about lights seen after midnight near the northern ridge. The ranger, identified as JT, described walking toward a faint glow between trees, thinking it was a lost camper or a lantern left on a stump. When JT approached, the glow separated into 2 reflections, like eyes spaced too high for a bear. JT wrote, "They blinked sideways. The ranger froze, and the reflections lowered, as if the shape crouched. Then they vanished in a downward motion, not backwards." JT said the forest floor made no sound during the movement. The memo ended with a single line: "Recommend closing ridge access at night." The recommendation was never implemented. In 2016, a hunter named Riley Morgan captured an unusual reflection on his trail camera near the Appalachian Trail in Virginia. The camera recorded 11 seconds of video showing a tall shadow crossing between 2 large oaks. The most unusual part came at the end, a brief flash of light at head height. The reflection was not a camera artifact, according to a local technician who examined the footage. It resembled the reflection from an eye, but the size and position did not match any known large animal in the area. Morgan stopped hunting alone after that season. Night incidents often include unusual silence that arrives moments before something appears. A 2019 report from the Trinity Alps Wilderness in California describes a pair of backpackers who noticed all insect noise stop at 12:17 a.m. They checked their watches and stood still, waiting to hear coyotes or wind. Instead, they heard a slow exhale from somewhere uphill, deep, steady, controlled. One backpacker shined a light toward the sound and saw a tall silhouette standing at the edge of a rock ledge. It did not move when the light touched it. The second backpacker said the figure looked too straight, like it did not breathe. They backed away until the normal nighttime sounds returned. Rangers acknowledge that nighttime changes perception, but certain details cannot be dismissed as misinterpretation. Height estimates repeating across states, eye reflections appearing on ridges known for missing persons, movements without sound recorded by people trained to notice unusual activity. In 2021, a retired ranger named Martha Ellison reviewed decades of logs from across Oregon, Tennessee, Colorado, and North Carolina. She found 47 references to tall shapes appearing at night on ridges or slopes. Most appeared between midnight and 3 a.m. in areas where disappearances were also recorded. One consistent detail stood out in Ellison's collection. The shapes never approached with normal footsteps. People described a sliding motion as though weight shifted without making contact with the ground. A witness in Colorado's San Juan National Forest wrote in 2022, "It moved sideways between trees. Its head stayed level." Another from Maine's Katahdin region in 2020 said, "It stepped across a gap without stepping." These statements come from individuals with no connection to one another, separated by thousands of miles. A lesser-known case occurred in 2014 inches the Adirondacks. A night fisherman named Paul Witt saw a figure standing at the edge of a lake around 3 a.m. The moonlit water reflected the silhouette clearly. Witt watched the figure step back into the tree line, but the reflection in the lake lagged by half a second. He described it as like a mirror catching up. Rangers attributed it to wind moving the water, but the lake was calm according to weather logs. Many of these sightings occur near ridges, where ground drops quickly and where visibility becomes deceptive under moonlight. When shapes appear at these heights, they often stand still, as if observing. Witnesses rarely report aggression or pursuit. Instead, they describe an unsettling awareness of being watched. Some rangers believe these ridge encounters represent something territorial, not predatory, something that travels between elevated points to observe the forest floor below. The nightwalkers, as a few rangers quietly call them, remain mostly unknown. Their movements are recorded in fragments, reflections, shadows, shapes against ridgelines. They step through the deep woods without disturbing branches or soil. They appear when the forest falls silent and vanish when the sounds return. The places people vanish without struggle. There are sections of America's deep woods where people disappear without leaving a trace, not a footprint, not a broken branch, not a scrap of clothing. Search teams describe these zones as quiet pockets, though the term appears only in verbal briefings, never in official logs. These disappearances rarely match typical lost hiker cases. They occur in places where the ground should show movement, where the soil is soft enough to hold prints, where dogs should pick up scent trails, but do not. When investigators study these places, they note an unusual pattern. The forest feels empty, as if sound itself refuses to stay. One of the earliest examples occurred in 1978 near Oregon's Clatsop State Forest. A hunter named Alan Reeves walked ahead of his group to scout a ridge. He was gone less than 10 minutes. His two companions called out and received no reply. When they followed his tracks, the trail ended abruptly in a patch of soft moss. The ground showed no further impressions. Moss experts later said a person could not step on that surface without leaving marks. Alan's rifle was never found. Search teams worked for 14 days. Dogs picked up a scent trail but lost it within 20 yards, circling the same area as if the trail simply vanished. A strikingly similar case happened 20 years later in 1,998 inches, Michigan's Huron-Manistee National Forest. A woman named Lydia Crane disappeared while walking a short loop trail with her husband. He stopped to tie his boot, and she continued a few yards ahead. When he looked up, she was gone. He called her name repeatedly. People on the nearby Maine trail reported hearing him, but no one heard Lydia respond. When rescuers arrived, they found no footprints leaving the trail, and her husband's calls echoed strangely in the valley. One ranger wrote in a private note, "Her voice should have answered even if she was far. The woods absorbed the sound." The note was never added to the official file. In 2007, a group of teenage hikers in Utah's Uinta Mountains reported watching one of their friends, Jacob Mason, walk toward a boulder to take a photo. He stepped behind it and never came back into view. When the group reached the boulder, the area behind it was empty. Snow covered the ground, yet no prints led away. Jacob's last photograph, recovered from his camera, showed the boulder's shadow stretching in an unusual direction, despite weather logs confirming steady cloud cover at that time. A search and rescue worker later said, "It was like he stepped behind a curtain." The phrase was dismissed as a metaphor, yet it appears in the margins of two additional team logs from the same search. Another quiet disappearance occurred in 2015 inches, Arkansas's Ozark National Forest. A bow hunter named Thomas Bell radioed his location to his brother at 12:41 p.m., saying he had reached a narrow draw lined with hickory trees. At 12:54 p.m., his brother radioed again, but Thomas did not respond. When search teams found his last known spot, they noted an unusual feature. The ground showed clear prints leading into the draw, but none leading out. A tracker said the soil conditions were ideal for holding impressions and that no wind or water had disturbed the area. Dogs brought from Little Rock failed to locate any scent beyond the first bend in the draw. One handler noted something unusual. The dogs hesitated like the trail ended mid-air. His remark was not included in the final report. Some cases involve altered ground conditions, as though the environment shifts shortly after a person disappears. In 2019, a father and son hiking in New Hampshire's White Mountains reported losing sight of the son for less than 30 seconds. He walked ahead around a small rise, and when the father crested the hill, the space beyond was empty. The father immediately called for help. When rangers arrived, they found the area strangely quiet. Wind in the higher trees did not reach the clearing. The grass around the boy's last known position was flattened in a circular pattern, but no prints or drag marks appeared within it. A ranger wrote in a later interview, "It looked like the grass had lain down under something heavy, but the weight left no shape." The case remains unsolved. Particularly troubling are places where dogs lose scent in open terrain with no obstacles. One such area lies near the border of Colorado's San Juan National Forest. In 2021, a trail runner named Everett Clark vanished during a training run. Search teams brought in 3 dogs from separate counties. All 3 dogs led their handlers along the same ridge and stopped at the exact same moss-covered patch of ground. They circled once, whined, and lay down. Handlers said this behavior occurs when a trail ends abruptly, usually at a roadway or body of water. But this ridge had no such barrier. The moss patch was surrounded by pine needles and soft soil, perfect for holding scent. One handler said quietly, "It's like he went up, not out." The comment appears only in her personal notebook. There are places where the forest floor itself seems to resist tracking. In 2012, near Montana's Cabinet Mountains, a skilled outdoorsman named David Holbrook disappeared while scouting a narrow drainage. His companion heard him say, "Hold on, something's here," followed by silence. He thought David was examining wildlife movement. When he reached the drainage, David was gone. The only unusual sign was a patch of soil pressed flat, smooth, as if brushed by a wide tool. No prints led toward or away from it. Investigators from 2 counties reviewed the scene, noting that the soil consistency should have recorded even small animals. Nothing appeared. A recurring element across these disappearances is the absence of struggle. No broken branches, no scattered belongings, no signs of someone running. In several cases, searchers report unusual silence settling over the area shortly after the person vanishes. This silence is not the natural quiet of nighttime. It is described as heavy, muffled, like the forest dampens sound. A 2020 disappearance in North Carolina's Nantahala National Forest involved this exact phenomenon. A group of college students reported hearing their friend call out suddenly, then the woods went silent for 5 full seconds. They compared it to being inside a closed room. The friend's voice did not return. Search teams later documented normal forest acoustics, though 2 rescuers noted privately that echoes felt dull. Cray. Ground changes appear again in the case of a backpacker who vanished in Washington's Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in 2018. His tent was found intact, zipper open, gear neatly arranged. The only odd detail was the ground around the tent pine needles pressed outward in a circular pattern, as though something expanded from the center. Soil reached between the needles in thin lines, almost like rays. A geologist reviewing photos said the pattern did not match any known natural process. Investigators comparing these cases see no common wildlife factor. No predator moves without leaving marks, no known animal causes ground depressions without tracks, and no natural phenomenon erases scent so completely that trained dogs stop at the same point again and again. If something in these forests can approach without struggle, remove a person without footprints, and leave behind silence where sound should exist, then these places may not be simple accident zones. They may be thresholds areas where whatever moves in the deep woods has the greatest advantage, stepping into the places where people vanish without warning, when sound disappears before people do. There are moments in the deep woods when sound seems to withdraw from the world, Witnesses describe these moments in simple, steady words. They say the air feels thick. They say the forest holds its breath. They say noises that should exist, wind, water, insects, footsteps, fade out in a way that feels wrong. These sound drops often occur minutes or seconds before someone goes missing, or before something large appears near a ridge or clearing. Search teams do not know what causes them. Scientists who review the cases call them acoustic anomalies, though none have provided a clear explanation. One of the earliest written mentions came from 1,969 inches, the Bitterroot Range in Montana. A ranger named Louis Brenner wrote about a sudden quiet that fell over Burnt Hollow at 4:12 p.m. He wrote the exact time because it startled him enough to check his watch. He reported hearing his own heartbeat, louder than the wind. 3 minutes later, a man named Fred Mason disappeared while walking ahead of his group. Brenner noted that Mason called out once just the word "here," and the final part of his voice cut off sharply, as if someone muted the last syllable. Mason's call never echoed. Brenner wrote, "The sound stopped too fast." In 1988, two brothers hiking in Colorado's San Isabel National Forest described something similar. Around mid-afternoon, they heard a loud cracking noise, like a branch breaking under weight. The first crack sounded normal. The second crack came halfway through. The brothers said it simply ended without finishing, almost like a tape being paused. When they searched the area, they found no fallen branch. The younger brother wrote in his report, "It was not silence, it was an unfinished sound." 30 minutes later, they reached a clearing where birds stood motionless on branches. One brother approached a jay that did not fly away until he was only a few feet from it. There was also a strange case in 2,003 inches, Oregon's Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest. A volunteer searcher named Brenda Keyes described hearing footsteps behind her while she was marking a grid for a missing hiker. The footsteps were slow and heavy, spaced farther apart than a human stride. She estimated the walker was 10 to 15 feet behind her, but when she turned, the footsteps stopped mid-step. The final sound cut so suddenly that she felt pressure in her ears. Keyes later said, "It was like something removed the rest of the sound from the air." She searched the ground behind her and found no indentations or disturbed soil. In 2010, a group of campers in the Sawtooth Wilderness in Idaho heard something unusual at 3:11 a.m. They were sitting around a dying fire when a deep, slow exhale echoed through the trees. The sound was long, steady, and carried weight, like something with a large chest cavity. But halfway through, the exhale disappeared entirely. One camper described it as like the forest swallowed the second half. The group did not sleep afterward. They left before sunrise, and when rangers examined their campsite 2 days later, they found the surrounding area lacked typical nighttime animal tracks. Search dogs often react strongly in these sound drop zones. In 2016, during a search in North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest, handlers noted that their dogs froze at the same moment the woods went silent. One dog lowered its head and backed away from a patch of ground where a missing woman's scarf was found. The handler described the silence as pressure-based. He said he could hear gravel under his boot, but could not hear wind moving above him. The woods returned to normal sound levels after about 9 seconds. A detailed case in 2019 involved an Appalachian trail section near Clingman's Dome. A hiker named Eric Palmer recorded audio on a small handheld device while walking alone. The recording starts with normal forest soundbirds, wind, boots on soil. At the 7-minute mark, all background noise fades abruptly, leaving only Palmer's footsteps. He stops walking, and the recording captures him saying, "What?" The final word cuts sharply, with only the first half audible. Then the device records 30 seconds of silence, not quiet forest ambience, but actual mechanical silence, the kind found in sealed rooms. Palmer disappeared that same morning. Rangers found the recorder on the trail, battery half full, no signs of damage. In many cases, echoes behave strangely. In Washington's Olympic National Forest in 2021, 2 backpackers rested near a lake and called across the water for fun. Only one of their voices produced an echo, and even that echo seemed delayed, as though bouncing from a different direction. The second backpacker's calls produced nothing at all. The lake was surrounded by granite outcrops that typically produce strong echoes. A ranger later tested the site and found echoes functioning normally. A 2022 case from Vermont's Green Mountain National Forest involved a search team performing a sound sweep, an exercise where volunteers shout or clap to detect response distance. One volunteer clapped 3 times. The first 2 claps echoed normally. The third clap made no sound at all. He brought his hands together and felt the impact, but the forest returned nothing, not even the original clap. He tried again. The sound returned, but only faintly. When he moved out of the area, his clap sounded normal. The incident was documented on video. Investigators later said the anomaly was caused by environmental interference, though they did not elaborate. In several disappearance cases, the missing person's final sound is incomplete. In 2014 inches, the Mark Twain National Forest, a teenager named Anthony Briggs shouted, "Wait for," before his voice cut out. His friends turned to look, but he was gone. The recording from one friend's phone caught only the first half of the word. Audio analysts tried to enhance the clip, but the final syllable was absent, not distorted, but missing entirely, as if removed. Some rescuers believe these sound drops are warnings, not warnings in an intentional sense, but signs of something entering the area, something that disrupts the environment before it appears. In interviews, rangers have said the same phrase independently. The woods go flat. They describe sound falling away in layers, starting with insects, then birds, then wind. One ranger from Maine said, "It feels like the world loses depth." Scientists have proposed explanations: temperature inversions, pressure waves, magnetic interference, even sudden humidity shifts. But none of these account for sounds that stop halfway, echoes that fail to return, or missing syllables from human voices. Witnesses across the country, separated by distance and decades, describe the same experience. Sound disappears before something else does. The forest becomes unnaturally quiet, and in that silence, people vanish, shadows move, or reflections appear when no eyes should be. Whatever exists in the deep woods, it seems to occupy a space that affects the world around it, not by touching, but by removing sound in a way no known creature can. Tracks that don't match any animal. Strange tracks have been reported in the deep woods for decades, appearing in places where people vanish or where sound drops without warning. These impressions do not look like footprints from any known creature. Rangers describe them quietly, often off the record, because the prints break rules of normal movement. Some show only half of a step, as if the rest of the foot never touched the ground. Others begin in the middle of open areas, with no leading approach. Some end abruptly, on flat soil, where tracks should continue for several yards. These impressions raise questions about what kind of creature could move through forests without leaving consistent marks. One of the earliest documented patterns came from 1,972 inches, the Cascades near Cougar, Washington. A survey team marking tree locations found a single elongated print beside a stream. The print measured almost 14 inches long, but it was narrow, only 4 inches wide. The heel area faded out sharply, which one surveyor described as cut off, like it didn't finish landing. Animal experts said the print did not match bear, elk, cougar, or human. The surrounding mud showed no additional impressions for 10 feet. The print sat alone in otherwise undisturbed soil. The surveyor wrote in his notebook, "Something touched down and then did not walk." In 1985, hunters in Pennsylvania's Bald Eagle State Forest reported a series of depressions leading across a patch of soft ground. The impressions were spaced nearly 6 feet apart. Each depression was circular, about 6 inches deep, with flattened centers and raised edges. They resembled pressure marks rather than footprints. A state wildlife officer examined them and said they looked like weight had been applied vertically, not through a walking motion. The hunters reported hearing a dull thump before seeing the impressions. The officer wrote, "Animal movement does not create uniform vertical impact." His note was included only in the internal file. More unusual patterns were recorded in 1,999 inches, Colorado's San Juan National Forest. A team searching for a missing geologist found marks that resembled wide, smooth tracks about 7 inches across. They appeared in pairs, each pair angled slightly inward, like steps taken by something with a narrow gait. The distance between pairs varied anywhere from 2 to 7 feet. A geomorphologist later examined photographs and said the impressions looked like controlled pressure points, created by something with consistent weight but inconsistent stride. The search team noted that the trail ended at a slab of granite with no soil on top. It did not continue on the other side. The geologist was never found. Half-prints became more common in the 2000s. In 2008, a hiker in the Great Smoky Mountains photographed 3 partial impressions along a ridge. Each print showed the front half of a foot-like shape, but the rear half dissolved into smooth dirt. A biologist studying the image noted that the soil composition should have preserved full impressions. The hiker reported seeing movement between trees minutes before capturing the photo, a tall shape that shifted behind a trunk. Rangers inspected the site and said the soil consistency made the prints inconclusive. Privately, one ranger noted that the impressions looked like weight landing but not pushing off. In 2013 inches, Maine's Allagash wilderness, snow patterns added more confusion. A local trapper found 10 tracks crossing a frozen pond. They looked like long, narrow depressions spaced too far apart for any known animal. The trapper estimated the spacing at 7 to 8 feet. No drag marks connected the impressions. The tracks began 20 feet from the pond's edge, continued across the ice, and ended abruptly halfway across. The trapper said the final track was deeper than the rest, as though whatever made it push downward before leaving. He described the event as something dropping in, then leaving up. Search teams noticed something similar in 2017 during a rescue in Montana's Gallatin Range. Snowshoe prints belonging to the missing person led toward a set of strange impressions. These impressions were circular, with a concave center. The missing person's tracks ended exactly 6 inches from one of the impressions. There were no signs of struggle or hesitations in the stride. The missing hiker was never located. A search leader said in an interview years later, "It looked like he met something." The print stopped right where the other marks began. Ground patterns also appear in non-winter landscapes. In 2020, a botanist examining rare plant growth in North Carolina's Nantahala National Forest documented flattened grass in long strips measuring 12 to 15 feet. The strips were straight and parallel, with narrow gaps between them. The botanist initially believed they were the result of machinery, but noted there was no access route for equipment. He also observed that the surrounding foliage showed no signs of disturbance. He wrote, "Whatever created these lines did not travel to them. It appeared directly on top of them." His colleagues dismissed the patterns as wind shear, though he disagreed and kept the photographs. Track experts studying these cases note a repeating pattern. Impressions appear without approach. They begin in open space or begin exactly where a person disappears. Traditional tracking rules do not apply. A retired ranger in Oregon described these impressions as arrival prints, as though something manifested rather than walked. He pointed to a 2021 case in the Mount Hood National Forest, where a pair of hikers vanished near a heavily wooded slope. Search teams found only 2 impressions, both deep, both oval, shaped, both touching toe, first into the soil. They did not continue. He described them as prints without a past or future. Another category of strange tracks involves bent vegetation rather than soil impressions. In 2018, a wildlife photographer hiking near Idaho's Clearwater National Forest noticed saplings leaning outward in a near-perfect arc. They had been bent at the same height, approximately 6 feet above ground. No claw marks or bites showed on the bark. The saplings were flexible, but strong winds that day would have bent them in random directions, not in alignment. The photographer heard a low thud nearby, then silence. Her camera malfunctioned and she captured no images. Rangers later found the saplings still bent, as though something tall had passed through and brushed them outward without breaking them. Some of the most unsettling patterns come from areas where people disappeared without struggle. In several cases, rangers documented soil depressions shaped like partial circles or ovals that seemed to indicate vertical movement either downward or upward. These patterns appear near the last known point of contact. They do not resemble pits or sinkholes. Instead, they look like wide footprints pressed directly downward. A ranger reviewing cases from the past decade wrote in his log, "The forest shows weight in places, but not the movement of that weight." These unusual impressions connect quietly to earlier chapters: sound drops, shifting geography, tall shapes, and disappearances without tracks. The prints suggest a creature or presence that does not move like animals we know. Instead of walking, it appears to land, stand, and leave. Instead of stepping forward, it leaves half prints that fade too quickly. Instead of creating trail lines, it makes isolated impressions that seem to appear out of nowhere. Whatever moves in the deep woods seems to avoid leaving a traditional trail. Its prints, when they appear at all, mark moments of contact brief, controlled, and rare. These are not the tracks of an animal roaming freely. They look more like the traces of something that enters the world only when needed, leaving behind impressions that resist explanation. The ones who came back changed. Not everyone who disappears in the deep woods stays gone. A small number of people return, found miles from where they vanished, or discovered wandering in clearings, with no memory of how they arrived. These survivors rarely show signs of struggle or injury. Instead, they describe peculiar sensations, missing time, distorted sound, and the feeling of being watched from angles that do not exist in ordinary space. Their accounts are not dramatic. They use simple, flat language, as though unsure how to explain what happened. Many speak slowly, pausing often, like someone recalling a dream that does not fully belong to them. One of the earliest known survivors was a 10-year-old boy named Daniel Rios, who vanished in 1974 near the Kaibab Plateau in Arizona. He disappeared for nearly 6 hours. Searchers found him sitting on a log beside a dry wash, staring at the ground. The area had been searched twice before. Daniel said he followed a tall man who made no sound. When asked to describe the man, he said he didn't touch the ground, he leaned the wrong way. Rangers assumed he had imagined the figure, but his clothes showed no dirt or wear, despite walking through thick brush. Daniel also returned with a strange detail. He said the man knew his name without asking. The boy remembered only silence after that. In 1992, a solo hiker named Margaret Hale disappeared for 14 hours in the Ozark National Forest. She reappeared at dawn, walking slowly across a wet meadow. Searchers noticed her clothes were completely dry, unusual, since it had rained heavily during the night. Margaret said the rain never reached her, even though she remembered seeing it falling. She recalled hearing her name whispered repeatedly, but every whisper came from a slightly different direction. She described them as layered, like several versions of the same voice speaking almost at the same time. When asked whether she saw anyone, Margaret said she noticed something move through the trees sideways, as if the front of it never faced me. A remarkable case from 2007 involved a college student named Ryan Key, who vanished along a trail in Washington's Olympic National Park. He was found 39 hours later, sitting at the base of a cedar tree with his hands placed neatly on his knees. Ryan remembered hearing footsteps behind him, slow, heavy, widely spaced, and then everything went quiet. He said the silence felt like stepping into thick air. He remembered nothing afterward except a shape like a line, which he said moved between trees faster than he could turn his head. When doctors examined him, they found no dehydration or fatigue, even though the weather was cold and he had no gear. His boots were completely free of soil. A similar incident happened in 2015 inches, the Long Trail area of Vermont. A woman named Alice Grant was found wandering a ridge 2 miles from her campsite. She had been missing for a full night. Alice seemed alert but confused. She told rescuers that she had followed a faint light, shaped like a thin oval, that hovered between trees. She said it moved ahead of her at walking speed. When she tried to shout for help, her voice made no sound. She felt her throat vibrate, but the air around her stayed quiet, as if sound could not exist. Alice said she finally stopped walking when she realized the light had no source. When dawn returned, she found herself standing on a ridge she had never seen before. Rangers later said reaching that ridge required climbing steep, rocky terrain, something she could not have done alone in the dark. Another unusual account came from 2018 inches, the Sierra National Forest. A firefighter named Adrian Cole vanished briefly while scouting a firebreak line. He was gone for only 52 minutes, yet searchers found him over a mile from his last known location. Adrian said he had walked into an area where everything around him faded. He said the trees appeared farther away than they should have been, as if the forest had stretched. He remembered hearing breathing slow, rhythmic, deeper than a human could produce. The sound came from above him, not from the ground. Adrian described feeling watched from a height that did not make sense for any animal. When he tried to move, he felt resistance, like walking through warm water. The sensation stopped suddenly, and he found himself near a slope overlooking the search team's camp. Some survivors report altered senses after returning. In 2020, a trail runner named Joel Simmons went missing for 4 hours in Kentucky's Daniel Boone National Forest. After he was found, Joel said he could hear footsteps that were not present. Even inside the ranger station, he claimed to hear heavy steps circling the building. Doctors believed he was experiencing stress hallucinations, but Joel insisted the footsteps grew louder whenever he closed his eyes. He said the steps did not belong to anything human, describing them as too even, too heavy, too slow. These phantom footsteps stopped only after 3 days. Memory gaps appear in many cases. In 2021, a mother named Christine Adler vanished from a campground in Wyoming for 11 hours. She was found walking along a dirt road at dusk. Christine remembered holding her flashlight and seeing something tall at the tree line. She said it swayed slightly, but not with the wind. She blinked, and suddenly, she was standing on the dirt road. Her flashlight was still turned on, The batteries showed almost no drain, even after 11 hours. Christine said she remembered pressure on her ears, similar to descending in an aeroplane. She did not remember walking anywhere. One of the most unsettling survivor accounts came from Maine in 2022. A man named David Loring disappeared while fishing near a remote stream. He returned the next morning, calm but distant. David said he had seen a figure standing across the stream. The figure was tall and thin, and its outline looked smudged. When he tried to call out, his voice echoed, strangely delayed, reversed, then gone. David said he felt a sudden pull backward, like being tugged by invisible hands. He remembered nothing else until sunrise. His watch, however, showed the correct time, but the second hand moved in uneven steps for several minutes after he returned. Survivors often describe the same sensation, something watching them from an angle that should not exist, above, beside, or behind them, in a way that defies the shape of the forest. They speak of pressure in the air, stretched distances, missing sound, and movement they cannot explain. They return unharmed physically, but with memories that break the rules of normal experience. Whatever exists in these woods does not always take people. Sometimes it observes them. Sometimes it misleads them. Sometimes it moves them. And sometimes it releases them, changed, quiet, confused, and unable to describe what watched them from the dark. The rangers who broke silence. Most official ranger reports from America's deep woods contain careful, measured language. Incidents are described in practical terms: lost hiker, animal activity, navigation error, or environmental hazard. Yet outside of these polished files, a quieter archive exists: private journals, resignation letters, after-hours conversations, and unfiled notes written by rangers who saw things they were never allowed to record publicly. These rangers describe shapes, sounds, and events that do not fit within normal forest behavior. Some spoke only after retiring. Others left clues in handwritten margins or in voice recordings kept off the books. Together, their accounts form a pattern that is as disturbing as it is restrained. One of the earliest known examples came from a ranger named William Bill Danner, who worked in Oregon's Mount Hood National Forest in the early 1982. Danner kept a personal log separate from his official notebook. In one entry from 1982, he described seeing a tall, narrow silhouette standing at the edge of a clearing at dusk. He wrote that the figure was straight as a post, too long in the legs, too thin in the torso. He shined his flashlight toward it, but the beam seemed to pass through a mist around the shape. Danner wrote, "It turned without bending anything." The next day, he attempted to file a report, but his supervisor told him to keep imagination out of the paperwork. Danner continued to write in his private log for 9 more years. In the 1992, a ranger named Elaine Proctor worked in Arkansas's Ozark National Forest. Her official reports were routine, but her private cassette recordings, found years after she retired, tell a different story. On a tape dated the 12th of September 1996, she described hearing someone walk parallel to her patrol route at night. She said the footsteps were slow, evenly spaced, and too heavy for any deer. When she called out, the footsteps stopped instantly, not gradually, but mid-step. Proctor whispered on the tape, "Nothing big stops that fast, nothing alive." She said she felt watched from above, though she could not see anything in the trees. Proctor never mentioned the event again in official documents. In 2004, a ranger trainee in New Mexico's Carson National Forest wrote a resignation letter after only 7 months on the job. In it, he described finding a set of deep impressions near a missing person's last known .2, oval depressions spaced too far apart for a human stride. His supervisor told him to classify them as erosion marks. The trainee wrote, "They weren't erosion. Something stood there, and it stood heavier than we do." He added that his supervisor told him privately, "We don't write down what we can't explain." One of the most detailed testimonies came from a retired ranger named Samuel Holt, who served in the Adirondacks for over 3 decades. In a recorded interview from 2021, Holt described seeing tall figures on ridgelines more times than I can count. He said they always appeared at dusk or dawn, always in peripheral vision, and always moved as though the ground did not matter. Holt claimed the Park Service discouraged staff from sharing unusual sightings. He said, "If you talk about it too much, they send you to office duty." Holt mentioned a memo circulated quietly in the early 2000s that advised rangers not to log non-actionable anomalies. This term does not appear in any public policy documents. Another ranger, identified only as KR, in internal emails from the Daniel Boone National Forest, described a 2010 incident where she and her partner tracked a missing hunter. They followed his prints for over a mile until the trail led to a patch of bare soil. The prints ended abruptly. Her partner said they should keep searching uphill. K.R. looked back at the soil and saw two shapes thin, straight depressions appear in the dirt, as though weight had pressed down from above. She wrote in an unsent report draft, "Something landed." She deleted the document, but saved the draft on a thumb drive discovered years later. Rangers in the Pacific Northwest have their own quiet network of warnings. In 2015, a ranger working near Olympic National Park's deep valleys said newer staff were told not to patrol certain off-trail sections alone. These warnings were verbal, not written. One ranger who left the service in 2018 said, "They don't say what you'll find. They just say the silence gets wrong in those spots." He described one patrol where the woods went quiet at sunset and he saw something tall shift between cedars. He said the movement was not fast, but it covered distance too smoothly. He reported feeling the air change, becoming still and thick. He returned to his station without completing the patrol. In Montana's Kootenai National Forest, a ranger named Dennis Price wrote an unsent email to his regional supervisor in 2019. In it, he described responding to a call about distant screaming heard near a lake. When he arrived, the area was silent. Price wrote, "Echoes don't die like that. It felt like the forest took the last part of the sound." He also saw marks on the shoreline, 3 long impressions parallel to one another, too deep for deer and too straight for a human. His supervisor advised him not to send the email, telling Price the regional office doesn't want noise about noise. Some rangers tried to document what they saw, only to face pressure to alter or remove details. A 2020 incident from Wyoming involved a ranger who included in his draft report that he had seen a tall figure on the North Ridge with an outline inconsistent with human shape. The phrase "inconsistent with human shape" was removed by an administrator before the report was filed. The ranger kept the original draft and later confirmed the edit in a private interview. Other rangers speak in simpler terms. A longtime staffer in Maine said, "If you work long enough in the deep spots, you know something's there." He described finding trees bent in the wrong direction, prints that didn't match any known animal, and trails that changed overnight. When asked why none of this appeared in his reports, he said, "We file what they accept, not what we see." These accounts, scattered across decades and states, share a quiet consistency. Rangers describe tall shapes moving without sound. They describe disappearing tracks, altered distances, sound drops, and pressure in the air. They describe warnings spoken privately but never written. And they describe internal pressure to maintain normal explanations even when the woods refuse to behave normally. Whatever exists in America's deep forests, rangers have seen pieces of it. Some tried to speak, some stopped trying, some left the job entirely. Their voices do not shape official policy, but they build an unofficial record, a record suggesting that something moves in the woods, something the agencies do not want on paper, the areas closest to whatever it is. Across the United States, certain forest regions show multiple anomalies stacked on top of one another: sound drops, missing footprints, distorted distances, strange impressions, nightwalker sightings, and disappearances without struggle. Rangers, search teams, and local residents rarely speak openly about these places, but their notes and accounts form patterns that narrow the map. These areas are not random. They appear clustered, often separated by hundreds of miles, yet marked by similar terrain features: deep ridges, heavy canopy, unstable acoustics, and old growth that blocks radio signals. These clusters may represent the closest points to whatever moves inside the woods. One of the strongest clusters lies in northern Washington, inside the deep valleys of the Olympic National Forest. Rangers have noted quiet pockets there since the 1970s. A retired ranger named Lyle Thatch recorded in 1979 that the Hoh River backcountry produced sound sinks areas where water noise dulled abruptly. He also reported seeing a tall, thin shape moving through a rain curtain without breaking it. In 2009, 2 hikers disappeared within 3 miles of this same zone. Their campsite was intact, backpack zippers undone, boots placed neatly at the tent's entrance, no prints led away. A search team later described the air near the river bend as flattened, with echoes returning only as faint delayed taps. Wildlife cameras placed nearby captured nothing but 4 seconds of distortion, like a shadow passing too close to the lens. In Colorado's San Juan Range, Another cluster forms along a series of high ridges and narrow bowls. These mountains record unusual terrain anomalies, trails that seem to shift length between the outbound and inbound hike, ridgeline silhouettes appearing at dusk, and snow depressions that begin or end without approach. A ranger named Jeff Collier wrote in 1998 that a section near Wolf Creek Pass produced paired noises where a hiker's voice echoed twice once normally, then again at a lower pitch 2 seconds later. Several disappearances have occurred here, including a trail runner in 2021 whose jeep's track ended in a patch of moss with no continuation. Collier believed the area carried weight signatures, meaning impressions too heavy to match wildlife, but too controlled to resemble rockfall. The Appalachians hold their own cluster, stretching from the Great Smoky Mountains into parts of the Nantahala and Pisgah forests. These woods record some of the highest numbers of missing person cases in the country, many occurring within a narrow belt of dense ridges. Sound drops appear frequently in this region. In 2015, a search team reported hearing a series of low, steady thuds on a ridge, then nothing, not even the faintest aftersound. The thuds ended mid-impact. In 2018, 2 separate hikers described seeing what looked like a tall shadow leaning against the slope at an angle that defied gravity. Both sightings occurred near Walker Knob. A tracker reviewing that year's disappearance cases wrote quietly, "The same shape keeps returning to the same ridge." Another cluster sits in Oregon's Mount Hood National Forest, especially in the older cedar stands. Here, surveys often reveal half-prints, small drift pockets, and echoes that return from the wrong direction. A 2003 crew logging trail conditions found bent saplings across a 30-foot stretch, all leaning outward in a uniform arc. No animal could have created such symmetry. 2 months later, a hiker vanished near the same location. Rangers searching the area noted that birds stopped calling whenever they approached the cedar swath, then resumed as soon as they stepped back out. One ranger wrote privately, "Something stands between the trees. We never see it, but the forest reacts first." In the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, the Hiawatha National Forest contains a smaller but unusually intense cluster. These reports focus on altered terrain clearings that shift shape, landmarks appearing in different positions, and trails leading hikers in circles despite stable compasses. In 1996, a ranger named Dale Arkin described walking into a zone where trees appeared stretched, as if the forest elongated slightly. In 2017, 2 campers heard heavy breathing near their tent. The sound cut abruptly, and the air pressure changed enough to make their ears pop. The next morning, they found circular impressions around their campsite, spaced evenly apart, as though something stood in multiple positions through the night. Another cluster forms in the deep interior of Maine's Allagash wilderness. These woods record unusual movement patterns, shadows traveling uphill, figures standing between white pines, and reflections at night in places too high for animals. A ranger trainee wrote in 2004 that she saw 2 tall shapes where trees should be, but when she blinked, they were gone. In 2019, fishermen on Eagle Lake heard a loud splash followed by silence. The silence lasted several minutes, long enough that their voices sounded muffled. When the normal sounds returned, they saw ripples on the lake, spreading inward rather than outward. Parts of the Ozark National Forest in Arkansas also display overlapping anomalies. Nightwalkers are often reported on ridges, appearing between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. In 2011, a wildlife biologist mapping bat populations noted that certain valleys dampened echolocations. She wrote, "Bat calls vanish before they return." Several disappearances occurred in this region, and in each case, search dogs lost scent at the same type of location. Flat clearings surrounded by rising slopes, places where the land creates a natural funnel of silence. What makes these clusters notable is not the number of incidents, but the similarity between them. Across thousands of miles, the same anomalies converge: sudden, quiet, distorted space, prints without approach, tall silhouettes, missing echoes, and vanishings without struggle. Each region also contains areas where wildlife behaves strangely: birds going silent at odd times, deer avoiding specific paths, predators refusing to enter certain ravines. Some researchers believe these clusters reveal boundaries or corridors, areas where whatever moves in the deep woods travels most easily. A former ranger from Colorado described them as channels, saying, "It doesn't live everywhere, it moves along certain lines." These lines often connect older, untouched sections of forest places with layered canopy, uneven geology, and minimal human development. They form quiet corridors, stretching across states, appearing only where the land avoids modern roads and settlement. Across all clusters, one detail repeats. Witnesses describe feeling watched before anything unusual happens. The sensation arrives suddenly, without reason, as though awareness itself changes first. Then the sound dulls, then the forest shifts, then something moves. These regions, scattered but consistent, may represent the closest points to whatever waits in the deep woods. They are zones where the land bends slightly, where sound behaves strangely, and where people cross paths with something the forest seems designed to hide. The patterns only seen from above. When viewed from the ground, the deep woods look uniform: trees, layered upon trees, slopes hidden behind brush, ravines buried in shadow. But from above, the forest tells a different story. Satellite images, aerial surveys, wildfire reconnaissance flights, and old forestry maps reveal shapes and disturbances that do not match natural patterns. These patterns appear in the same clusters where disappearances occur, where sound drops abruptly, and where tracks do not follow normal movement. The shapes are subtle, often overlooked, but when placed side by side, they form lines, arcs, and corridors that suggest something large is moving through the woods in ways only visible from the sky. One of the first unusual observations came in 1987 during a helicopter survey of Oregon's Mount Hood National Forest. A forestry pilot named Daniel Roche noticed a series of narrow canopy openings that formed a near straight line across nearly half a mile of dense cedar. These openings were not logging cuts, not storm damage, and not fire scars. They were small, just wide enough for light to reach the ground, but each gap lined up precisely with the next. Roche noted the alignment in his log, saying, "Something passed through here in a direct path." Ground crews later walked the route but found nothing. The gaps were too high to see from below. In 1999, a satellite imaging project over Colorado's San Juan Range recorded a repeating pattern on a ridge south of Wolf Creek Pass. The canopy showed 7 oval disturbances spaced at almost perfect intervals, each about 15 feet wide. A geospatial analyst noted that the shapes resembled pressure points, as if weight had pressed downward from above. The ovals did not match windfall, snow compression, or animal movement. The analyst flagged the images but archived them quietly, unsure how to classify the pattern. 22 years later, the same ridge recorded a disappearance under similar conditions. Aerial crews fighting wildfires sometimes encounter strange arrangements in untouched areas. In 2014, firefighters in Washington's Olympic Peninsula flew over a deep valley near the Bogachil River. They saw a curved line of treetops bent slightly outward, as if brushed by something wide moving along a sweeping arc. The bend extended for more than 200 yards. On the ground, the trees looked normal, bark intact. No scorch marks, no broken branches. Only from above could crews see the alignment. One pilot wrote, "Not wind. Wind bends in one direction. This bent outward on both sides." He recorded the coordinates, then moved on to fire operations. Drones have captured similar anomalies. In 2018, a drone survey in Maine's Allagash Wilderness documented circular clearings less than 30 feet across, surrounded by older pines. The circles contained smooth soil with no vegetation. What made the pattern unusual was their arrangement. 5 circles forming a near-perfect pentagon. Botanists reviewing the footage speculated about fungal activity or past human structures, but soil tests showed no chemical markers of decay or construction. A ranger watching the footage quietly noted, "These look like landing spots, not growth patterns." Satellite imagery in 2020 revealed a long, ribbon-like disturbance stretching through parts of the Nantahala National Forest in North Carolina. The disturbance was not visible from the ground because the lower canopy remained intact. Only the uppermost branches showed signs of separation, like something tall had moved through at mid-canopy height. The path ran for almost 3 miles before ending abruptly at a steep rock face. When analysts compared the path to topographic maps, they noted that it followed the easiest natural contour through the valley, a route that would allow something large to move without descending. Aerial photographs of Michigan's Hiawatha National Forest, taken in 1996, then again in 2016, show a repeating formation of canopy shadows that shift position over time. The shadows form a long, narrow, curved pattern that reappears every few years in slightly altered locations. Foresters originally believed the shadows came from tree lean or growth variation, but when researchers aligned the images chronologically, they discovered the pattern moved east by nearly 60 yards over 20 years. Tree growth cannot produce such lateral shifts. The pattern resembled a ripple, long, shallow, and moving slowly across the forest. In 2021, an environmental survey drone flew over Idaho's Clearwater National Forest and captured a shape moving beneath the canopy. The movement was faint, a slight ripple in the tree crowns. Analysts at the University of Idaho examined the footage and determined that the disturbance moved in a straight line about 12 feet across, nearly 200 yards long. The ripple traveled with smooth consistency. Wildlife biologists dismissed the idea of any known species causing it. Elk herds move in clusters. Bears do not travel in straight lines for that distance. The ripple also moved faster than wind changes. The footage was labeled unexplained canopy shift. Some aerial anomalies appear only during winter. In Montana's Gallatin Range, satellite thermal images occasionally detect warm patches beneath thick tree cover in areas where no humans or large animals were present. These patches appear as faint orange smudges, elongated rather than circular. In 2013, a thermal imaging specialist noted that one patch showed a vertical temperature gradient as though heat rose from something tall, not from the ground. The patch disappeared on the next satellite pass, which occurred only minutes later. There are also alignment patterns. In Vermont's Green Mountains, a retired GIS analyst noticed that 3 clusters of disappearances formed a straight line when plotted on a map. The line extended over 20 miles. Independently, a botanist studying unusual plant die-offs mapped 5 clearings with unexplained soil flattening. When overlaid on the disappearance line, the plant clearings fell almost exactly along the same trajectory. Both maps crossed through a section of forest known locally as the Quiet Stretch, where hikers report sound dropping unexpectedly. Aerial data often exposes details invisible from the ground. In 2022, satellite imagery taken after a storm in Tennessee's Frozen Head region revealed a single, wide indentation in the canopy, an oval depression with smooth edges, as though something broad and heavy had pressed down on the treetops. The depression measured almost 60 feet across. No fallen tree or storm damage matched the shape. Days later, hikers reported hearing deep, slow breathing sounds near the same ridge. Ground teams cannot confirm these aerial patterns. The disturbances vanish when approached on foot, hidden by lower branches and understory growth. But from above, the shapes remain clear: lines, arcs, ripples, ovals, and moving shadows. These patterns echo one thing: whatever moves in the deep woods is tall, wide, and consistent enough to leave traces in the upper canopy. Its presence is not random, it follows paths. It interacts with the landscape at a scale larger than any known animal, and it leaves its clearest marks only where humans are least likely to look high above the treetops, the things that watch from the tree line. At the edges of clearings, ridges, and trails, people sometimes notice something standing still so still that at first they mistake it for a burnt stump, a leaning trunk, or a trick of dusk. Only later do they realize the shape was watching them. These sightings rarely involve movement. The figures appear stationary, almost patient, blending into the tree line until a shift in light reveals their outline. Many of these encounters occur at moments when hikers feel the strange sensation of being observed long before they see anything. One of the earliest detailed accounts came from 1,976 inches, West Virginia's Monongahela National Forest. A hunter named Carl Henson was hiking back to camp at dusk when he noticed what he thought was a charred tree on a ridge. It stood tall and narrow, slightly bent. As he walked, the shape straightened. Carl said it shifted, the way a person straightens posture, but with no accompanying movement of shoulders or limbs. When he raised his binoculars, the shape blended suddenly with the trees, as though it had melted backward without stepping. Carl reported feeling an unusual heaviness around his ears, a quiet pressure that lasted several seconds before fading. In 1991, a group of trail workers in Colorado's San Juan Range reported seeing a dark figure standing at the border of a meadow. They described it as too tall for a human, thin, with long proportions. One worker said its head was higher than the lowest branches of the nearby firs. The figure did not move, even as the crew approached within 50 yards. The team leader wrote in his personal notes, "It watched us the entire time we crossed the meadow. It did not sway, did not shift, did not blink. The meadow fell silent, and their saws echoed strangely against the ridge. When they turned back, the figure was gone." A well-known case within ranger circles occurred in 2,003 inches, the Ouachita National Forest. A ranger named Marcus Eves was checking trail signage in late afternoon when he noticed a shape standing between two oaks. He first assumed it was a hiker, but as he approached, the figure appeared too tall and too straight, with no visible gear. Marcus called out, but no reply came. He said the figure's silhouette looked cut from the dark, sharper than the fading daylight. When he blinked, the shape vanished. Marcus searched the area and found no footprints, though the ground was soft from recent rain. He wrote in an off-record journal, "It was watching before I saw it." Something similar occurred in 2012 inches, Maine's Allagash Wilderness. A pair of night kayakers paddling near the tree line saw a narrow vertical reflection in the water, two faint glints, spaced too far apart for any animal. When they pointed their headlamps toward the tree line, the reflections disappeared, but they felt strong pressure in the air, as though something large had retreated silently. Later, a ranger reviewing their description noted that similar eye-height reflections had been reported in that area 3 times in the previous decade. In 2016, a backpacker in Oregon's Mount Hood region captured a photograph that remains debated among local outdoor communities. The image shows a dim clearing with a tall shadow at the tree line. The shadow stands straight and appears slightly detached from the nearest trunk. The backpacker said the figure did not move for over a minute. When he raised his camera, the air went silent. No wind, no birds, no rustling leaves. As soon as he clicked the shutter, the shape slid sideways behind a tree. He said the movement was smooth, like gliding on a track. Rangers later dismissed the photo as a trick of exposure, though several noted privately that the proportions were unusual. Treeline watchers also appear in the Appalachians. In 2018, a woman hiking a ridge near Clingman's Dome reported seeing a tall figure standing completely still at the edge of a slope. She said it looked as though the figure faced her, but she could not see features, only the outline. She also noticed that the slope beneath the figure was steep enough that anything standing there should have leaned forward, yet the silhouette remained perfectly vertical. When a cloud passed and dimmed the light, the shape dissolved into the background. The woman later said she felt watched for several minutes afterward, even though she saw nothing else. One of the clearest accounts surfaced in 2020 from a search team in Idaho's Clearwater National Forest. They were scanning a ridge at dusk when a volunteer pointed to what he thought was a burnt log standing upright. As the last light faded, the shape's outline sharpened. 2 faint reflections appeared near the top, pale and flat, not round. One searcher whispered, "Eyes," though he later denied saying it. The reflections blinked once, sideways, rather than vertically. Before anyone could react, the shape receded without any sound of stepping or brush movement. The entire ridge fell quiet for several seconds. The search team did not approach the tree line that night. In some cases, these watchers appear not as figures, but as distortions. In 2021, a hunter in Vermont described seeing a bent vertical smear between 2 trees. He assumed it was heat distortion or fog, but the temperature was near freezing and the air was clear. When he walked closer, the smear straightened into a tall, thin silhouette. The hunter said the shape seemed to shift position without turning. He felt his chest tighten, as if the air was being drawn outward. When he looked away for a moment, the shape disappeared. Nighttime sightings tend to be more unsettling. In 2022, 2 campers in the Mark Twain National Forest saw a figure at the edge of their firelight. It stood beside a sycamore, unmoving. The fire flickered, and the figure flickered with it, like a shadow cast by a light source that did not exist. One camper said the figure leaned slightly, but the angle was wrong, leaning uphill instead of down. They watched for nearly 10 minutes until the fire died low. When they added wood and the flame brightened, the figure was gone. Several survivors who returned after vanishing described the same thing. They felt watched before anything else happened. Some say they saw shapes standing between trees. Others say they sensed eyes at a height no animal could reach. A few recall reflections flat, pale reflections too high off the ground, too far apart, or blinking in impossible ways. One ranger from Montana summed up these tree-line watches in a quiet, unfiled memo. They don't chase, they don't hide, they wait, they watch the places where the land bends easiest. These watchers rarely move, they rarely approach. They simply stand at the edges, silent, tall, and patient, looking from tree lines that hold more secrets than open ground ever will. The evidence hidden in the silence. Across thousands of acres of deep American forest, scattered through decades of ranger notes, missing person files, witness logs, and quiet testimonies, a single element repeats more consistently than tracks, shapes, or sightings. It is silence, thick, sudden, and unnatural. Long before shapes appear at the tree line, before trails shift, before people vanish without footprints, the forest falls quiet in a way that does not match wind, weather, or wildlife patterns. This silence leaves its own kind of evidence, not in dramatic signs, but in missing pieces, sounds cut short, echoes that do not return, scents that vanish, and moments when the world seems to hold its breath. One of the earliest references to the phenomenon appears in a 1959 Fire Lookout journal from Montana's Bitterroot Range. The lookout, identified only as RM, wrote that the valley below him flattened at 6:13 p.m. He explained that the wind slowed, then stopped, yet the treetops continued to sway for several seconds afterward. Then everything went still. RM wrote, "Silence rose up the valley like fog. During that same week, 2 hikers disappeared in the drainage beneath the lookout tower. Their tracks ended in soft soil. Dogs found nothing." In 1974, a field ecologist working in Oregon's Mackenzie River corridor recorded a similar event. Her sound equipment captured ambient forest noise at stable levels until 4:37 p.m., when all wildlife audio abruptly halted. There was no fade out, only a hard silence, like someone flipping a switch. 14 seconds later, her recorder picked up a single, low, resonant hum lasting just under 2 seconds. A spectrogram later showed the hum did not match machinery, wind vibration, or any known animal. The ecologist noted in her log, "Silence was the environment, not the absence of sound." Silence often appears seconds before disappearances. In 1988, 2 hikers in Tennessee's Frozen Head region reported hearing their friend call out, then stop abruptly mid-word. They described the moment as a vacuum of sound. Birds in the canopy froze. Their friend was gone. Rangers who searched the site noted that echoes behaved strangely. One ranger clapped and heard no return. Another whistled and heard it echo from behind him instead of from the rock face ahead. These details were recorded in personal notebooks, not official reports. One of the most carefully documented silence events occurred in 2009 inches, the San Juan Range. A search team, looking for a missing geologist, entered a basin where radio chatter thinned. At 3:14 p.m, their radios went dead, though weather conditions were clear. The team leader later said, "It felt like our voices were getting pulled out of the air." Minutes later, they found 2 deep, oval impressions in the soil, fresh, heavy, and without any connecting tracks. The geologist was never located. The search team's audio recorders captured the silence as a flat band, with no ambient noise at all. In 2016, a backpacker in the Hiawatha National Forest noticed a total sound drop just before seeing a tall shape at the tree line. He described the silence as pressurized, like descending too quickly in an airplane. He said the pressure grew stronger the longer the figure stood still. When the figure slipped back into the trees, sound returned in a wave-first wind, then insects, then distant water. His recording captured the return of natural sound in layers, consistent with other reports, where the woods seemed to restart after an encounter. Some silence events repeat in the same locations over years. In North Carolina's Nantahala National Forest, a clearing near Walker Knob has been associated with at least 7 missing person cases since the early 1990 seconds. Each disappearance occurred after witnesses reported the woods going quiet without warning. In 2013, a ranger testing acoustic behavior in the clearing clapped his hands and heard no echo. He moved 20 feet north and tried again. The echo returned normally. He repeated the test at multiple points and found that the silence pocket measured roughly 30 feet in diameter, spherical, not shaped by the terrain. He recorded in his field book, "Silence has boundaries here." Silence also affects animals. Hunters and wildlife biologists have noted deer freezing suddenly, predators avoiding certain ridges, and birds refusing to cross specific tree lines. In 2020, a wildlife specialist in Maine observed a flock of crows split into 2 groups mid-flight, diverting around an invisible boundary near the Allagash Wilderness. He reviewed weather data and found no pressure anomalies that could explain the sudden flight path shift. Later that year, 2 night campers reported hearing slow breathing near that same boundary before the woods fell silent. A striking example involving scent occurred in 2021 inches, Wyoming. Search dogs, following a missing woman's trail, suddenly stopped at the edge of a small ravine. In all 3 attempts, the dogs froze, circled once, and lay down. Handlers described the moment as a wall of quiet. Even the dog's breathing sounded muted. The scent trail vanished, as if swallowed. Examination of the ravine revealed no interference, no water, no strong winds, no chemicals. The missing woman's pack was later found a half-mile away, placed neatly on a rock shelf with no footprints leading to it. Silence also appears in combination with distortions in space. In 2022, a pair of mountain bikers in Oregon reported riding into a patch of silent air where the trail seemed to stretch farther than it should have. They said the trees looked taller and depth felt off, like distances had doubled. When they left the silent zone, everything snapped back. One biker described the experience as stepping into a missing second, a phrase echoed by several other hikers in unrelated regions. In many different forests, Olympic, Pisgah, San Juan, Hiawatha, Allagash witnesses describe the same sequence: a feeling of being watched, a sudden collapse of sound, a strange pressure in the air, and then either a sighting or a disappearance. In some cases, nothing happens at all. The silence arrives, holds for a moment, and releases. Yet even in those instances, people walk away uneasy, sensing they were close to something that exists beyond normal explanation. If there is evidence of a creature or presence moving through the deep woods, this silence may be its most consistent footprint. It is the trace left behind when sound itself responds to whatever is there, not by noise, but by absence, not by struggle, but by stillness. The forests across the United States hold many mysteries, but in these zones, silence becomes the clearest sign that something stands nearby, something that can move without steps, watch without eyes, and erase the world's sound before it steps into view. If you made it this far, you've walked through some of the most unsettling forests in America, places where silence behaves like a living thing, where people vanish without a trace, and where something tall waits just beyond the tree line. These cases come from real logs, real reports, and decades of unexplained patterns. And there are many more hidden in archives across the country. If you want deeper dives into specific regions, missing person clusters, or ranger testimonies, let me know in the comments. Make sure to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next investigation. Your support helps bring these hidden stories to light. Stay alert out there, and never ignore sudden silence in the woods.